so happy all of you are here and that you came to join us to be educated a little bit by our speaker on human trafficking. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Florence Cole, and I'm the president of the United Women in Faith unit here at First Church. And also, for those of you who are not familiar with what our organization is all about, excuse me. Yeah. We believe that love in action can change the world. And we're committed to inclusiveness, action where it's needed, and impact on our mission to support women, children, and youth. We've been doing God's work for 150 years. We're pleased to be able to offer educational presentations and forums to the community like this. Hopefully, we'll continue to do more of them and to spotlight these issues that are so important in the world today. I know that we'll gain knowledge from tonight's meeting, and I hope you'll share the word with other people the next time we plan one. And so, with that, I'm glad you came, and I'm going to ask Melinda to come up.
Thank you, Florence. Good evening, y'all, and welcome to our program today. Before I introduce our guest speaker, I would like to open us with a small prayer. Please pray with me. Lord, we come to you this day in thanksgiving for a safe environment where we can meet without fear. We come seeking your protection for all those who are exploited and enslaved through human trafficking and denied their freedoms. We ask that you release their chains and grant them protection, safety, and empowerment, and to restore their dignity and provide a new beginning for them. I'm sorry, y'all, I may cry. Let us open our hearts and minds today. Please show us how we might reach out in support of such victims and survivors of human trafficking. Make us your instruments of your spirit for their liberation. Hear and answer our prayers in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. So I get the honor and the privilege to introduce our guest speaker today. I've known him for 20 years now. And it's a great joy that I get to share some things with you that he may or may not like it, but to quote him, that's just the way it is. So he was born and raised, lives and breathes Texas. And if you've seen him in his boots and have you talked to him, you will know that is very true. He served as a member of the United States Air Force Reserves. He graduated from both Abilene Christian University and the University of Houston Law School. He's married to Miss Carol for 50 years. That's an accomplishment for anybody. That he has 4 children and 12 grandchildren, and I'm going to let him tell you about his grandchildren because it's quite special. He has a father who's going to be 96 this year, and he served in World War II. And a funny thing about that is, Ted says that he calls him every morning, and the first thing out of his mouth is, "I don't hurt anywhere." Doesn't matter who's calling, he says that. His entire life was influenced by his Christian grandmother, which was, I believe, your mother's mother. He was a prosecutor for the Harris County District Attorney's Office in Houston for 8 years and never lost a jury trial. He was appointed to the district court judge in Texas, and by the way, he was the youngest district court judge for Texas ever appointed. He's tried felony cases for over 22 years and was known for his innovative sentencing, which the press called poetic justice. He was elected 7 times to the United States Congress from Houston, and while in Congress, he was a lead sponsor of legislation that created the World War I Memorial in Washington, which is currently being built. Also in Congress, he was the co-founder of the Victims' Right Caucus, introduced and passed bipartisan legislation, including the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act. He is currently working with numerous groups and educating them regarding the scourge of human trafficking. So out of all of this, the one thing that I say is consistent with our speaker and what makes him so special is that he has been, and always be, an advocate for protecting victims. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming my friend, Judge Ted Poe.
Thank you, Melinda. Thank you for that introduction. Some of it was true. But it's great to be here. And I appreciate you letting me cross the Sabine River and come over here into Louisiana. When I was in Congress, I represented the west side of the Sabine River, Jefferson County, Liberty County, and northern Harris County. And Charlie Bustani was the member of Congress on this side. We served in Congress together. We told people that we had a lot in common because people in Louisiana voted in Texas elections and people in Texas voted in your elections. And, you know, there's a little truth to some of that. But anyway, it's nice and great to be here, and I appreciate the invite to talk to you what, as Melinda said, the scourge of human trafficking. I have always been in public service, and the reason I've been in public service was because my grandmother, when I was growing up, told me to be in public service. And I always tried to do what she told me to do, and taught school, Air Force, prosecutor, judge, member of Congress. Don't hold that against me for being in Congress. Always in public service. She did frown on one of my decisions, however. My grandmother was a real yellow dog Democrat and proud of it, and never forgave me for being a Republican. And she even said one time, "I'm not sure you can go to heaven being a Republican," and I think she meant it when she said that. But anyway, it is good to be here. And yes, I've been married to Carol now almost 51 years, God bless her, and we have 4 kids and 12 grandkids. I did all of the weddings for our 4 kids, 3 girls and a boy, when I was a judge. And during the wedding, you know, we had the vows and all of the normal stuff you have for a wedding, but I made the new son-in-law-to-be promise me that they would live in Texas. And they did. And they all live in Texas. And all 12 grandkids have been born in Texas. And so we've got 12 grandkids. Of course, they all got names, but I don't call them by their names. I call them by their birth number. You know, 4, come over here. 7, leave 12 alone. You know, I said, call them by the birth number. And they like their birth numbers. And they call each other by their birth numbers. So that's a little bit about me. When I was in the DA's office, and even as a judge, I prosecuted the worst people in our society. And we got a lot of outlaws in Texas. Probably you don't have that many in Louisiana, but we have a lot in Texas. And I prosecuted a lot of them. And these are the bad folks, you know, murder, kidnapping, robbery, child abuse, rape, all those cases. That's what I did for 8 years. And then I became a judge in a court that tried felony cases like that. And people ask me during that time, did that make me jaded, seeing all of the worst acts that people commit against each other? And it really didn't. It made me more sensitive. And not so much sensitive to the plight of the offender, but to the victim of crime. And same in Congress, I became more sensitive to the plight of the people that really don't have a voice in our culture, the victims of crime. And if we go back to the good Lord, He taught the greatest lesson ever told about compassion. And it was, it could have happened in Houston. He's talking about a person that's going from Jerusalem to Jericho down the road, and he gets beat up by some bad guys, outlaws. He's thrown in the ditch, property's taken, and he lays there. And then what happens? People started walking by him. Good people, You've heard the story. They walked by him, and all of a sudden a person who's a Samaritan, who was a different race, and probably the Jews and the Samaritans didn't get along in that day and time, but he stopped and took care of his wounds, took him to hospital, paid for his treatment, and would pay more when he came back if the person needed it. Now, that was the story of the Good Samaritan. Jesus is telling us to have compassion on the guy in the ditch, the person in the ditch. That's who he's focusing our attention on. So anyway, and primarily I became more sensitive about the plight of child victims. Probably the hardest case anybody in the country can try as a prosecutor or as a judge is a case that involves the murder of a child. And I tried those cases. I prosecuted those cases. People who murdered children and abused children, tortured children. Those people need a voice. They don't have a voice. And they need our voice as a community to speak for them in whatever circumstances that they find themselves a victim of crime. And in Congress, we have lobbies for everything. There is the offshore drilling caucus lobby, and there's the anti-offshore drilling caucus. I mean, we got lobbyists for everything, and we have caucuses, that's members of Congress, who promote legislation on everything. But when I got to Congress, I realized there was no voice or caucus, and certainly no lobby for victims of crime. There's not one. And I was kind of surprised, really, I was. Because, as a prosecutor and 22 years as a judge, seeing a lot of victims come to court. But do you know the reason why I think there's no lobby or caucus for victims? There's no money in it. That's what I believe. There's no money in it. So anyway, myself and Jim Costa from California, Democrat, and I mention that because everything that worked that I did and that was successful in Congress was bipartisan, contrary to what the media says. It was bipartisan. And we started the Victims' Rights Caucus. It was exactly what it says. We advocated on behalf of victims of crime and tried to pass legislation to advocate for them. And it was hard because, like I said, we were up against no one who wanted to really support victims of crime. People give lip service to it, but you got a lot of folks, and as there should be, that promote legislation for the person accused of crime. I'm a big believer in all of that legislation, the criminal defendant in court. But we needed people to do something for the victims of crime. So Jim Costa and I started that, and one of the things that we did was to try to make sure that victims of crime got restitution on the federal level when they could. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I'll give you one example, and you may not even know about this. Ronald Reagan, when he was president, he passed and authorized legislation called the Victims of Crime Act. It's called VOCA, Victims of Crime Act. And what that did was, in federal cases of criminal conduct, when you have somebody come to court charged with racketeering, money laundering, kidnapping, federal court cases, if the person's convicted, the federal judge can impose a fine or fee on the offender, and that money goes into a fund called the Victims of Crime Fund, and that money is used to help pay for medical expenses, etc., for victims of crime. Great idea, It's not taxpayer money. It's money that defendants have paid into a system that they have created, It's like paying rent on the courthouse. You caused the problem, you're going to pay for it. Great piece of legislation. And so Costa and I tried to increase the amount of money spent in that fund, And finally, that happened. And it's a lot of money. As of the end of last year, that fund, remember, it's not taxpayer money, but it's fund from defendants. $13 billion is in that fund. Now, of course, I don't think that's, I keep saying, let's spend it rather than just leaving it in there. Of course, another story, well, why is it still there? Because the government uses that money as an offset for other projects that they're building, like bridges and whatever else. So those of you who are accountants or CPAs can understand the fuzzy math. So it's not being spent a lot because it's being used to pay for other projects. That's just wrong. That's just wrong. Pay that money. So one morning, really, which is the busiest time of the day for a member of Congress, is in the morning before everything starts. This lady walked into my office, and my assistant came in. She said, "We have a person out here who wants to meet with you." And I said, "Okay, well, I'll meet with her when I can." She said, "Well, she needs to talk to you as soon as you can." And so I went out there, never seen her before, and I met her. And she was a trafficked victim. She told me her story. Why is she in my office? Because she'd heard about the Victims' Rights Caucus. And so she comes in, and she wanted to tell me her story. Sure, let's hear it. What's going on? That was my first real experience about human sex trafficking. Now remember, we are not talking about smuggling people into the United States illegally or legally or whatever. That is smuggling. But people brought into the United States for labor or sex trafficking is called trafficking. So trafficking has to do with crimes against the person. Smuggling is bringing folks in illegally. May or may not include trafficking. Just understand the difference, what we're talking about. And she told me how she was trafficked in the United States. American citizen. She was 22. And she gave me her story and wanted some help from the government, from Congress, to help stop the scourge of trafficking. And so she told me her story. It was rough to listen to her story. And I will admit to you, I'd kind of heard on the fringes about trafficking, but not until this person, I think the Lord sent her, get me straight, that what was occurring, it's the sale of America's youth on the altar of sex trade. That's what it is. And I say America's youth. Most of the people trafficked in the United States, under that definition I gave you. Average age is 13. 13, and a female. Some are older, some are younger, some are younger. Average age. I'm not going to give you a lot of statistics, but I'm going to give you some I want you to remember. 13 years old. Americans. 20% of the people trafficked in the United States, primarily women, girls, are brought into the United States to be trafficked. 20%. 80% live here. Most of them are citizens that are trafficked. The hub in the United States, anybody want to guess what city is the hub of human sex trafficking in the United States? Nope. Houston, Texas. Houston, Texas. And you can figure out why. Close to the border, has a seaport, Interstate 10, those kids and tractors go right through here, Interstate 10. Go in both directions, all the way to Los Angeles, all the way to Florida. So, anyway, I was on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I wasn't on the Foreign Affairs Committee because we border Louisiana. I was on the Foreign Affairs Committee because do I need to use the microphone? I'll hold it then. I'll hold it then so you can hear me. Sorry. Anyway, when I traveled, and I traveled really all over the world. I was chairman of the terrorism subcommittee, so I got to go to all the countries where you had to wear a bulletproof vest. That's why my staff said, "Well, get your bulletproof vest. You're going to Kazakhstan, or Afghanistan and Iraq, got to go to all those countries. But I learned about the international sex trafficking scheme. And it started, one place it starts is in Romania. Romania. I met the person that worked for the government who was in charge of sex trafficking and awareness in Romania. And what was happening was Romanian women, since the wall came down, can't find jobs. So a person will show up at a house, a residence, and promise young Romanian girl, minor or probably not a minor, a lucrative job in Africa, North Africa. And they traffic them from Romania to North Africa. Of course, they go immediately into the slavery, sex slavery, and they disappear. And it's still going on in Africa. You know, in Libya, where it's total chaos, people are trying to get from Libya to Italy, but they're being trafficked throughout Africa once they show up in Libya, when they come from the western part of Africa. So there's a whole route going on in that area of the world. And of course, there are other places as well. I've been to Peru, and up on the mountains in Peru is a shelter run by French nuns. I mean, they're from France. And I met with 60 young girls who were being trafficked. In Peru, the native Peruvians, Aztec, I think, or Incas, I get them backwards. Anyway, the natives are trafficked in South America, native girls. And there were 60 of them. The youngest trafficked victim, now you know what trafficking is, I've explained it to you, was 6. Lily was 6. I met her. She did not talk. I don't know if she could or not, but she did not talk, and she had never talked since they rescued her and put her in this shelter, according to the nuns there. Because what had happened to her is that much trauma. So it's an international problem. Wherever you go, there is a problem. Of course, Thailand, the Southeast Asia, tremendous problem about women in Southeast Asia being trafficked back and forth from Japan, Philippines, etc. United States, let's come back here. So, how many people are trafficked? No one knows. You can read all kinds of statistics on the internet, but no one knows. There's a group of women I'm going to mention to you in a minute that say that in Dallas there are 400 girls a night trafficked in Dallas. Well, do the math of that. 400 times 365, you can see it's quite a few young ladies being trafficked. How do they get trafficked? It's every kind of way. One way is a girl will go to the mall alone. Big mistake. Don't ever let anyone you love that's a female go to the mall by themselves, especially if they're 13. That is just, don't do it. And so they will go to the mall. There'll be some good-looking guy, probably 20, 21, will meet them, be real nice to them, real kind to them. They'll exchange information. They'll communicate on the internet. They'll meet again at the mall the next Saturday. Then eventually the person will want to come by or meet them at a third place, like a pizza parlor. And then the girl disappears. She's kidnapped. We had a case exactly like that in Houston, where a girl had met a guy at the mall. She was 14. They were going to meet for pizza, and they did meet for pizza. But Mama said, I'm going to sit in the parking lot, and I'll let you off and go into the pizza place, but I'm going to sit in the parking lot till you come back out. She never came back out. They went out the back door. See, and she was put in human sex trafficking, kidnapped. But these guys are professionals to pick up young girls, and they prey on victimology. Nobody loves me. You know, they feel that way. I don't have anybody, nobody cares for me, nobody loves me. Some of them are runaways, some of them are not runaways. These individuals prey on that, spend money on them, and then eventually put them in the human sex trafficking. And that's one way. Another way is the organized criminal gangs and the drug cartels. People be promised, we'll bring you across the border, we have a job for you in Lafayette, okay, or New Orleans. They have already paid, or their family has already paid the drug dealer, drug trafficker, anywhere from $500 to $5,000 to take them from Honduras to the United States to give them a job. This is what the family believes is going to happen to this child, this girl, or told that. And they pay the money already to this individual. The drug cartels traffic young women and adult women across the border, along with drugs. And then they turn them usually over to a criminal syndicate in the United States, like the MS-13 gang, once they come across the border, and then they disappear throughout the country. They're trafficked. That is another way. We as a society underestimate the drug cartels, the criminal gangs. That's exactly what they are. They're in it for the money, and there is a lot of money. Still, the number one illegal activity in the world is the sale of narcotics across borders in the world. Second now is human sex trafficking. Soon will pass drug trafficking. Why is that? There's three reasons. First of all, the chance of being captured transporting girls across the border is lower than being caught as a drug dealer. Second, girls can be bought and sold multiple times a day, and they are. Drugs you sell one time. And the punishment for the drug trafficker or the human sex trafficker is less than what happens to drug traffickers. So if you do the math and you figure it out, hey, this is an enterprise I can make a lot of money in, and they do. So in our lifetime, it's going to pass drug trafficking as the number one moneymaker for the criminal gangs throughout the world, criminal cartels. They're a lot smarter than we give them credit for. So we worked together. I worked with Carolyn Maloney. Now, Carolyn Maloney is a New York Democrat that talks funny. And she's working with a Texas Republican that she says talks funny. That's about as bipartisan as you can get. And we sponsored the Victims of Trafficking Act, which does these three things on the national level. It goes after the trafficker. The worst person in the whole system is the trafficker. And make sure that the laws, the punishment for that is, you don't get but one chance to go to court. And the laws are tough on the trafficker, really good laws. There are two other entities that are in the trafficking scheme. There's the buyer, then there's the victim. Let's go to the victim. We take the victim under federal law and change the national consciousness of a victim. A lot of people think they are people that are trafficked. They're prostitutes. They're doing it because they want to. Well, they're not criminals, especially children. I mean, the law in this country is you cannot consent to sex if you are a child. You can't. It's a crime. So, especially with minors, it's a crime. And we take victims and treat them like victims instead of like criminals. I'll get back to that in a minute. And then we go after the buyer. To me, I think if we go after the buyers, we're going to slow this nonsense down because it's all about money. There is a demand for this conduct. The traffickers are supplying that demand. But the people that pay for it and demand it, we ought to make sure they don't ever do it again once they're caught. Society has kind of treated these buyers a little differently than you treat most people who violate the law. You know, even in a standard, I don't want to use that phrase, in a prostitution case where prostitution is legal or illegal, the buyer, you notice how society always covers up who the buyer is? Use their initials, let them put a bag over their head when they go to court, all that. You've seen that all on TV. Why do we do that? If the public knew who the buyer was, he wouldn't do it again. He wouldn't. I'm telling you, he wouldn't do it again. So we need to punish the buyers, but we need to expose the buyers, who they are, what they do. And the law allows for that too. And the buyers now in the United States under federal law can be treated the same as the trafficker, get the same punishment, not get a little suspended sentence with a little fine, they can go to prison just like the trafficker. Then there's the victim. Here is the real issue with victims. They are tough people to help. They are the toughest people I have ever come in contact with to try to help for all the reasons you can figure out. These young girls who have been trafficked for some time, and I'm 6 months, a year, they have had their complete identity stolen from them. Some have said they had their soul stolen from them by what had happened to them. They don't trust anybody. They don't like anybody. And sometimes they even take the side of the trafficker because at least he does support me. You know, you ladies can figure all that out better than us males can. But they're very difficult to work with. They don't trust anybody. And so what happens? The groups that try to help the victims, long term, they're back in the same business they were doing. It just turns out that way. Because they haven't had their identity is stolen, they want it back. And so what we have done, I say we, as a society, we try to prosecute the trafficker. We want the victim to testify against the trafficker or the buyer. The victims don't want to testify. They don't want to testify. They won't testify in many cases. So as a culture, we are changing that idea that the real goal is not first to get the trafficker or even the buyer. The first goal is to rescue and restore the victim. Give them some sense of worth. Take care of them. They're the one laying in the ditch. Take care of them. And we're gradually understanding in the criminal justice system, the victim is who we ought to focus on. The first thing you do is when they take a victim, that they rescue, the police, they don't put her in jail. But they do. Now, why do they put them in jail? Because they don't have any place to put them. In all fairness to law enforcement, they don't have any place to take them. And there it lies the most important and critical issue in the whole system. Right now, there are groups who are taking after their medical needs, helping them in other ways. And maybe down the road, there'll be a prosecution of the trafficker and the buyer. But the goal is to rescue and restore the victim. Second statistic, 13 years old was the first one. Second statistic, there are 5,000 animal shelters in the United States. And I got we have 3 Dalmatians. I call them the weapons of mass destruction. Got one of them from Dalmatian Rescue out of Dallas, But there are 5,000 animal shelters. And you see the ads on TV every weekend, and you multiply how many facilities they have, 150 at each of those shelters, but there are 5,000. Nothing wrong with that. But in the United States of America, designated beds for minor sex trafficked victims. You follow me? Minor sex trafficked victims, designated beds for them only, 600 beds. 600. Now, there are shelters that will take any type of abused female, including sex trafficked victims. I'm not including them. I'm including designated beds for minor sex trafficked victims. And you can't give a minor who's been rescued a couple of days therapy and send them on their way. It doesn't work. They need long-term recovery. And some of them are successful and some of them aren't. But there's only 600 beds in the whole country. That's the first problem. There's no place to take them. Once they're rescued, many places will take them to the hospital, good. But long-term recovery, getting your soul back, there's only 600 beds. Going back to the shelters that I have seen in other countries, and even in the United States, the ones that work, and what I mean by work, they take a victim, adult, minor girl, primarily female, and take care of their needs, get them a job, etc. The government ones really don't work very well. They just don't. The ones that work are faith-based. And I know that because I've seen them. That one up in the Peruvian mountains, faith-based. They need the good Lord in their lives. They do. We all do. But when there's faith-based, they work. You can make that statistic prove whatever you want it to prove. But the ones where the government is involved and there's no faith-based, they're not near as successful as faith-based. There was a group of women at a women's Wednesday night class in Dallas, Texas. Preston Church of Christ. Kind of an old congregation, not as old as this one. And they met on, none of them are as old as this one. They met on Wednesday nights, ladies' class. And I guess they had 15, 20, 25 ladies there. And one night, they met at Wednesday night, 7:30. That's the scriptural time in the Church of Christ to meet on Wednesday night, 7:30. I'm okay. In comes a person by the name of Amy. Amy said she was a street walker, and she walked the streets around Preston Church of Christ. And she was asking for some help. She met one of the ladies going in the meeting. And they said, come on in with us. And so Amy went in, stayed for the lesson, got some help, financial help from some of the ladies that were there. And now she's still working as a prostitute, And so she started coming to that meeting on Wednesday night and started bringing some of her friends who did the same thing to the meeting on Wednesday night, to these women. Now, I don't know exactly what took place there, but those ladies of the night, wanted to be around these Christian women, and they started helping them in every way they could. They helped them medically, financially, go back to school, get a job, get a place to live, get out of the, prostitution business. Some of them were sex trafficking. What do you mean by that? Weren't they voluntarily? Look, I don't believe there's any woman who wants to grow up and become a prostitute. I don't think they want to do that. But they get in that trade, and then they've got this person who manages them, and they don't have a choice. They beat them up if they don't perform. They really do. It's a bad situation. They're trafficking victims. Anyway, so this group of women started helping, got organized, started doing all kinds of things, and they started an organization called New Friends, New Life. You can look them up on the internet. Very successful group in Dallas, Texas. Now it's a 501(c) group that does that same thing, that help women who are trafficked get a job, finish their education, all of those things. Learn a trade, teach them about Jesus. And it all came from a group of women who met at the church building once a week, gotten involved in these other women's lives and helped them, and they're very successful. They have a lot of, they do a lot of things. New Friends, New Life. They've been around, I think it was in 1999 when they had that meeting with Amy. So I just mentioned that to you because you ladies, you know, you can make a difference in people's lives. And you can make a difference in young ladies' lives. But the problem is when they're rescued, there's no place long-term to put them. Shelters. Now, you have a good one here in Louisiana, one of the best in the country. It's in Baton Rouge. It's Metanoia. Metanoia is a shelter for trafficking victims. It's run by really the caretakers, I guess that's the right word. They are nuns that are there that do it. Women that come in that shelter, it takes them a while, but they begin to trust those people who live there, the nuns. Religious order, I think is the proper term. And they're in Baton Rouge. They're in a secure place. And it's long term. I mean, they're there a year. And you recognize that, and they're very successful at theirs. One thing that happened recently, we found that model works for helping people. So, working with the Catholic Church, we have brought in some nuns from foreign countries just recently, 28, to work in shelters in the United States, both Catholic and Protestant shelters, the few that are there. And it seems to work because it's hard to find people to work in a situation like that. So these nuns, we just got them in the country in December. We had a big celebration. They came from Nigeria and the Philippines. They're working in shelters, human sex trafficking shelters. That is the most difficult problem we face. So I'm going to I'll open it up for questions in just a minute. I think I will. I don't know. And I want to just emphasize that one thing about the shelters is the law allows in Texas that a judge and a person's convicted can require public notice of the crime in the county in which the crime was committed. Okay? It's pretty broad. Public notice. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Public notice. And I like that law. And I used it a lot. For example, what are you talking about? Give you an example. We had a guy that was a student at one of our universities. He's working on his MBA, but he liked to steal. He loved to steal. The thrill of victory, just stealing it. He didn't need it. He had money. He's going to one of our universities. He got a lot of money. And in Texas, if you commit a theft the third time, regardless of amount, that's a felony. In other words, you have a misdemeanor theft case, another misdemeanor theft case, and you steal another misdemeanor amount worth of property. That third one becomes a felony. Everything's a felony in Texas. But that's a felony, third felony. So he goes into a Walmart and he shoplifts something. He gets caught stealing. Comes to my court because it's felony, third offense. He'd been in jail before. Harris County Jail, there's thousands of people in jail there. He'd go in, I could put him in jail. Go in, slip out, nobody ever know anything about it. So I tried it. I did something different. I wanted public notice of the crime in which the county was committed. So I ordered that he go back out to this Walmart. You know, it's kind of un-American to steal from Walmart, wouldn't you think? Anyway, he goes out to Walmart and he carries a sign that he made in my courtroom. And the sign that he carried for 7 days in front of Walmart was, I stole from this store. Don't be a thief or this will be you. And so he carried the sign up and down in front of Walmart for 7 days. I didn't know how it would work. I did not know if it'd be good or bad or what. Well, people stopped and talked to him about his conduct. One lady wanted to take him to church on Sunday and save him. She did. Come with me, you poor thing. You know, she wanted to save him. And after that week was over, he later was on the national news, and he said the most embarrassing thing that ever happened to him. Got his mind straight, had an attitude adjustment right there. And he finished his MBA. He's a business guy in Houston. In fact, for several years after that case, he would call me and give me ideas on other cases for other people. He really did. He really did. So, and then the store manager calls. The Walmart store manager calls me. He said, Judge Poe, you know, the week that guy was out there in front of my store carrying that sign, I didn't have any stealing going on in the store. Well, no kidding. Well, who got that message? You know, those would-be thieves that drive by and they say, ooh, let's don't go in here and steal something. Let's go to Target and steal, you know. So, public punishment. Now, that all gets back to the buyer. I think it's appropriate that we let the public know who those buyers are of our children and require that they, you know, whatever it takes for society to know who they are, what they look like, and who they are. And I'm not talking about registering as sex offenders. Nobody knows who those people are. But making public notice of the crime you commit. And I think that might help, because the key, I personally believe, being in the criminal justice system all my life, was we got to go for the buyers. And stop the buying, stop the marketplace of sex slavery, rescue the victims, traffickers, they'll get what they deserve eventually anyway. We have some problems in the system. Even though we have good laws, Louisiana has some good laws. Your governor does a great job on sex trafficking issues. Is enforcement. Law enforcement, these are hard cases to make. They're tough cases. They're expensive cases to work on a trafficking case. And so many times they don't do it. They go work on something else. You know, they just do. So we have to encourage law enforcement, usually the prosecution, to make these cases and try these cases. Don't bump them down to misdemeanors. Try them as felonies. Make sure that people are held accountable for what they do. And one thing we're trying to encourage, I say we, those of us who are working on this issue, a lot of times victims won't testify for all the reasons you can think of. They don't want to testify, you know, they don't want the person punished, that person was their income, whatever. They don't testify. They won't testify. Now, we can make them testify, but that's not good. That's not good for the recovery of the victim to make them testify in a court of law when they don't want to. So now we're encouraging the prosecutors on the state level and the federal level, try the case like you would try a murder case without the victim. Prepare your case as a circumstantial evidence case and try it without the victim. Oh, okay. And they're starting to do that, and they're starting to be successful at trying cases without the victim of the crime. So I'd like to just tell you a little short story, and then I'll open up for questions. Like I told you, I have 4 daughters, 3 daughters, a son, and 12 grandkids. Now, when my oldest girl, Kim, who's in her 40s now, was 8, she wanted to get on a girls' soccer team. So we put her on a girls' soccer team. You know, this was 32 years ago. Put her on a girls' soccer team. Then the coach of the girls' soccer team decided to move from Houston to California for some reason. And they needed a coach for the girls' soccer team. And they volunteered me. Now, we don't play soccer in Texas. We play football, much less girls playing soccer. But anyway, so they needed a coach for the girls' soccer team. So they enlisted me, and I coached the girls for 1 year. And now don't get me wrong, it wasn't a great season. We lost every game except one we tied 0-0. Now, it wasn't that, But this was occurring in the games. We'd be playing the game, they'd be playing. I'm holding a rule book over here in my hand, trying to figure out what's offsides and all of that stuff. And so I'd substitute some girl, bring her off the field, and put another girl in. And the girl I'd bring off the field, she'd be standing over here, and she'd start pouting. Pouting. Then she'd start crying. I couldn't figure this out. I could not figure this. What do you mean? Why are you crying? It's not because we're losing the game. We lost every game. Why are you crying? And then that would happen not every time, but it happened periodically throughout the year. I'd bring some girl off, and then she'd start pouting and crying, and then her mother would start yelling at me over here, put her back in the game, put her back in the game, And that was it. They wanted to be in the game. They wanted to play. And it wasn't like we were winning every game. We were losing every game. But they wanted to be on the field of play. And most Americans are not on the field of play. They're in the stands, drinking their Bud Light, eating their hot dogs, and they're criticizing the people down there on the field of play. They are. Most Americans are like that. But these girls, they wanted to play. And it wasn't important that they would win. It was important that they're in the game. And we could learn a lesson from those 8-year-old girls. We need to get in the field, get on the field, get in the game. Because that's the only place we'll ever make a difference, is if we're involved in the lives of other people. So anyway, I'll stop there because I saw the clock. Must be a government clock then. It's expensive and doesn't work. It's a government clock. Any questions or comments? Are you in shock? Mm-hmm. New friends, new life. They found housing. Yes, they are primarily a non-residential facility. They help women on a short-term basis do exactly what I said. Have them accountable to another person, get them a job, finish their education, housing, all of those things. They help all of those things. Help with their own children, the victims' children. They're very organized. And you can look them up, like I said, on the internet. New Friends, New Life, run by a bunch of women, of course. I mean, yeah, if you want to get it done, ask a woman to do it, or tell a woman to do it. Ask her to do it. And that's New Friends, New Life. It's a great organization. So it's just one, though. Yes, sir. Yes. Yes. Oh, don't get me started. Don't get me started. Okay. We had 2 girls that were in elementary school, going to one of our elementary schools. After school, they would go independently, not together, and they would get piano lessons from a nearby guy who taught piano lessons in his house. And then after a period of time, he started messing with the girls, fondling them, to be specific. The 2 girls told each other about it, and then they told their parents. And then the police gets involved, and they charge him with unlawful touching of a minor, 2 cases. We get to trial, get to court. Here's what happens. The girls don't want to testify. I mean, they're elementary school, 7, 8, 9 years old. Their parents don't want them to testify. So what do you do? Of course, the defendant's over there, move for dismissal, move for dismissal. You know, it's the case dismissed. Now, I could have dismissed the case, but I didn't dismiss the case. I told the prosecutor and defense lawyer, I said, y'all go into my office, and you come out when you have worked out a plea agreement. And just stay back there until you do. And so they came back out, and they came back out into the courtroom, and they said, Judge, we recommend probation. That's a suspended sentence for 10 years. 10 years probation, suspended sentence. Now, you're probably like me. I don't think people who mess with little girls ought to get probation. They ought to go to jail. That's why we build those things. So we asked the parents, do you agree to 10 years probation? Yes, we don't want our kids to testify. Now, under our law, the judge determines the conditions of probation. I'm the judge, I determine the conditions of probation. I don't turn that over to the probation department. That's not their job. Their job is to enforce the rules I make for these guys. So the first thing I did, I ordered therapy for the girls and their families. He was wealthy, and he's paying for it. And he has to go to therapy as well. That's just the start. Under Texas law, if something is used in the commission of a crime, it's called a criminal instrument, and the judge can order it forfeited to the state. Now, when our legislature wrote that law, they were thinking about guns and Bowie knives and things like that, but that's not what they said. They said anything used in the commission of a crime, the judge can order it forfeited to the state as a criminal instrument. So I ordered that the piano in his house be forfeited to the state of Texas. Now, I don't know anything about pianos, but it was real expensive. And so we got some inmates in the county jail, went out to his house, took the piano out of his house, took it down the street to the elementary school where the girls went to school, and now the school's got themselves a new expensive piano. You know, criminal instrument. I found it was a criminal instrument. There were a lot of other conditions, but one other condition, while we were at his house, and my chief probation officer, who was a former school teacher, she put on the front door of his residence, by order of the District Court of Texas, that's me, no children under the age of 17 allowed on these premises, and nailed it on the wall of his front door. Now, we didn't say, beware child molester. We didn't say that. We said, and it was one of his conditions, he couldn't be around any children. I mean, that makes sense, doesn't it? But we just thought we'd give public notice that he could not be around children. And we put that sign. Of course, people figured it out. Even people from Texas A&M could figure out what that sign means. But anyway, that was one of them. Poetic justice. We had a guy that he was an abuser, beat up his wife. My grandmother, once again, she said, you never hurt somebody you claim you love. You just don't do it. Okay, I think that's true. But he would beat up his wife for no reason, and there is no reason. So he had come home. He stopped off at a beer joint in Pasadena, Texas, named He Ain't Here. Think about it. He ain't here, click. He had too much to drink, comes home, he beats up his wife. She calls the police. They arrest him. They charge him with aggravated assault on a spouse. In Texas, if you do it twice, the second one is a felony, of course. And so he comes to my court. He's charged with aggravated assault on a spouse. Wife is over there like many, many spouses do. They've been beat down so bad, they think the crime is their fault, not his. And this spouse was that way. Don't put him in jail. Don't put him in jail. Well, I put him in jail anyway. I put him in 6 months in the county jail. I think jail therapy is good for folks. He had jail therapy for 6 months, comes back into my courtroom and was probated sentence for the rest of this 5-year sentence. It's probated. But he walked into the courtroom and he had an attitude problem. You could tell he had an attitude. Well, I was in the attitude adjustment business. So I ordered, and he just didn't get it. Even 6 months in jail didn't faze him a bit. I said, you're going to apologize to your wife for what you did to her. Now, I would routinely require letters of apology to crime victims in the appropriate cases. And I said, you're not going to apologize to her in my courtroom. It's not big enough, although I did have the biggest courtroom in Houston. I said, you're going to apologize to her on the steps of City Hall at high noon next Monday morning. Now, the wife agreed to this. If she didn't agree, I wasn't going to do it. You know, I didn't want to embarrass her. But she agreed to it. She said, you bet. And so we had the wife there and the kids, but somebody called the news media, and they showed up. I don't know who that was. And then we had the director of the women's shelter told all of her ladies that, and we had a lot of them show up at the courthouse or the city hall. And on a hot summer day at high noon in August, he apologized to his wife for what he did to her. And he was embarrassed. And he was supposed to be. You know, in crime, the victims are embarrassed. They shouldn't be, but they are. He's the one that committed the conduct that's improper. He should be ashamed, embarrassed. Public notice, poetic justice. Did it work? Yep. Safest wife in Pasadena, Texas. Because the community knows about his conduct and they're watching out for her. I mean, that's what communities do. They just reacts that way. So, yes, those are a few examples of poetic justice. And did they work? Well, I did it about 900 different cases. And the recidivism rate was about 11%. So 11% of them came back. 89% we never saw again. So yes, it would work. Because the statistics on people going to prison and repeating is extremely high. It's 66%. In Texas anyway. What does that mean? You go to prison in Texas, when a person gets out, 66% of them will commit another felony and get caught and go back. 66%. That's a pretty high recidivism rate. If you were in business, you would probably change your business model on that because it doesn't, that's what happened in our prisons. Anyway, so 89% recovery success, and yes, it would work. And so I have all those cases I could talk about, but I'm not going to. But oh, I don't know. Okay, some of y'all are old enough. Do y'all remember anybody remember who Clayton Moore was? Who was Clayton Moore? Clayton Moore was the actor who portrayed the Lone Ranger on television back in the late 50s and early 60s when television was normal on Saturday morning. Some of you may remember those days of yesteryear. 8 o'clock, Ren 1010. 8:30, Fury. 9 o'clock, Sky King. 9:30, the Roy Rogers Show. And at 10 o'clock, the Lone Ranger came on television. I was a fan of the Lone Ranger. He was my hero. But Clayton Moore portrayed the actor in that series on television. Black and white days. After he finished that series, he would still travel around the United States and dress up like the Lone Ranger and do benefits for primarily children. He was in Houston. He did a benefit on Christmas Eve for the crippled children of Houston, dressed up like the Lone Ranger. He talked about America. He loved our country. And he goes to the Houston Intercontinental Airport, flies back to Los Angeles. His luggage did not show up with him. In his luggage was not only his costume, but his 2 .45 Colt revolver pistols. Now, those were his real guns that he used on television. They were worth $100,000 a piece back in the 80s. And it was stolen. Guy stole them, tried to pawn them at a local pawn shop. The owner of the pawn shop recognized the guns, called the police. This guy's charged with theft of the Lone Ranger's guns. Case landed in my court. My childhood hero, right there. A couple of things happened. Clayton Moore shows up at the trial. He's dressed up like the Lone Ranger. He walks in the courtroom, takes the oath, tell the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth. Of course, the defense lawyer jumps out of his chair, said, Judge Poe, make him take off that mask and change clothes. I overruled that objection. You may wonder why. People have been trying to find out who the identity of the Lone Ranger for years, and I wasn't going to be the person that went down in the history books as the guy who unmasked the Lone Ranger. You testify with your mask on, your hat, you're fine. So that was appealed, of course. It was appealed to the highest court in Texas. Highest court in Texas said, well, there are really no rules about what witnesses wear. It's up to the judge. And Judge Poe, we know how he is, so they upheld the conviction. Anyway, so he's convicted. And the jury, we have jury sentencing in Texas. Only one of two states that you can pick before the trial if you want the jury or the judge to assess your punishment. If you have a trial, you still get to pick who does the punishment. Well, they always pick the jury in my court, The jury gave him 10 years suspended sentence. That means you're on probation for 10 years. The judge gives you rules. You follow the rules. It's dismissed. If you violate the rules, the judge can bring you back in and send you off to the penitentiary. Once again, I decide the rules, conditions of probation. Now, I always ordered community service. It's no big deal now. Judges are routinely ordering community service, but it was kind of new in the late 80s. And so what type of community service did you order for the guy who stole the Lone Ranger's guns? These symbol everything that's good and right about America. I ordered that he do 20 hours a month for 10 years at the Houston Police Department Mounted Patrol Division stables, cleaning up after horses like Silver and Trigger and Buttercup. That's true. So, poetic justice. Judges have to make an impact on the offender. They also need to make an impact on the victim. Let the victims know, hey, it's going to be okay. We're going to do the right thing. And the public needs to know. How many times do you read the newspaper and you see something happen to some offender down at the courthouse and you say, they keep letting them go or whatever. You got to get the offender's attention. You got to get the victim's attention. You got to get the public's attention. And judges must make the system work. That's the way I look at it. So, they were glad to see me leave the courthouse and head to Congress. Yes, sir. Yep. That's right. And you have discussed exactly what takes place. And it can happen to any group, any race, any financial background. It happens to all, and you're 13 years old, and that's who they are. One kind of really troubling statistic is when a girl is kidnapped, law enforcement says we got to find them in 36 hours, or we won't find them. Because the traffickers move them around a lot. I told you Houston's a hub. They get to Houston, they move them to Boston. Their MS-13 gang runs them there for a week, and they'll move them somewhere else. They'll move them to Canada. They move them around the entire United States until they don't want them anymore. But 36 hours is what law enforcement says. If we find them, we'll find them within 36 hours. So real tough. And they prey on the uneducated. They prey on the young. They prey on people who have low self-esteem. All of that happens. And it happens in all of the different ways that I mentioned to you. We even had a case, we had a federal case where a woman sold her daughter who was 8 for a cell phone. Trafficked her for a cell phone. Now, they were immigrants. That doesn't make any difference. But 8 years old, the trafficker gave her a cell phone. Here's my daughter. You got her. And sometimes it's families that traffic. It's not all strangers that are out kidnapping and taking these girls. Sometimes it's families. Trafficked victims. Oh, I said I wouldn't give you all these statistics. Oh, there's one more. And then I'll stop talking. I mean, I could talk till the Lord comes, but I won't. It's time to quit. I know I'm getting the high sign. Okay. Go ahead. there's a lot of denial going on. There's a lot of denial. And I'll say this again, those are tough cases to make. Small law enforcement agencies, they will tell you they don't have the ability to investigate trafficking cases. They really don't. That's why it's important that different agencies, large agencies, work with small agencies on this issue. Because it's like drugs. The girl may be kidnapped in Lafayette. She'll end up in Dallas, see, or Kansas City. All these places have jurisdiction of that case. And that causes another problem because you have multiple jurisdictions. But anyway, law enforcement has got to be aware of it. There's a lot of denial in our communities about it. I've talked to a lot of groups, and they don't believe me when I tell them some of these things I've been telling you. They don't believe me. It doesn't happen here. It does. It does. Yes, ma'am. Well, awareness is the first thing. And awareness is the first thing. And people are becoming more aware. Flight attendants are being trained now to recognize small children, teenage girls traveling by themselves on airplanes. You know, that's just about stopped because those are trafficking victims in many cases. There's training that's been done at our hotel industry, casinos. Yep, all that helps, you know, about call this number. If you're a trafficking victim, call this number. That helps. Now they're in men's restrooms too because 30% of the trafficking victims are young boys. So they say. We don't know how the statistic. And I think all those things help. And the casino industry, some of them are helping really with training and recognizing victims of trafficking. And the police are called. But it goes back, though, to the real problem. There's no place for them to go. Once they're rescued, there's no place for them to go long term. So that's what we need in the system is more places. I mean, at least we ought to get up as many as 5,000. What do you have for animal shelters? We ought to have that many. I mean, that's kind of an... Sure. That's true. It depends on the situation. But if they're a runaway, they're treated a certain way as a runaway. Then as opposed to that they can't go back. They're put in foster care. In our foster care, we got to work on our foster care system. Some people say, and I don't know if this is true, 2/3 of trafficked victims have been in foster care. That doesn't surprise me, but that's what they say, anecdotally. The girls say they were in foster care. You know, you can probably understand that. We got to do everything, but awareness is the first thing. And rescuing them, finding places for them, supporting law enforcement, going after the buyers. We can make a difference, but helping them. They're in the ditch. We got to get them, help them. There was another question. I'll stop. Last question. It's a good question. You know, I'll come back to that answer. Last question. Yeah, you want to make a comment? It won't fix it.
It's just such a big thing. And for me, if heaven forbid anything happens to my child ever, there's gonna be no scenarios of mother going to be like, okay, probation is adequate for this. Like our price tag on the father of our children has to raise. Like it can't be okay to just be on probation for hurting our children.
Oh, well, I agree with that. They ought to be in prison if they're caught, buyers and traffickers. But what you mentioned, though, was something that I had not said, and it's social media. The traffickers work social media to pick up young girls. And you need to know as a mother who your daughter is talking to on TikTok and social media. You need to know. It's self-preservation.
How did TikTok go 3 years ago being one of the #1 most dangerous apps that the FBI warned against, and now it's the most popular thing in publicly traded, the greatest thing in the kitchen? How did that?
It's still not the greatest thing that kids ought to have. It's just easier to be on it now, and people take their chances with their children being on TikTok. It is. Take that cell phone away from your kids, or put all those gizmos on it where you can track not only where the cell phone is, but if they have it, you can track where they're going and what they're seeing. I mean, you can do all that, but it's not socially accepted to do what you're talking about. But that is a big part of all of the network, is the internet, social. Buyers. That's a good point, yeah. It starts with the local congregation, women like y'all, but it goes to the parents, getting them involved and understanding what's going on. And parents, if they understand this, they're gonna do the best they can, I think. Most parents will do the right thing to help their kids, but being aware of it. And it's real easy, these internet crimes that are committed against children. There's a police officer that I know in Texas that all he does is pretend to be a 13-year-old girl on the internet. And he's making several cases a day. And it's easy to do, to pretend to be I'm not going to say everything I know about it, but it's relatively easy to get somebody out there to answer on the internet thinking that this is a girl and have a meeting, and they meet them. And I was at a conference that we were hosting, just like this. He said, I'll show you what. I'm going to get one here. And he had one come to the hotel where the conference was, picked him up and arrested him for soliciting over the internet. It's pretty easy to do. And I say that because that's where a lot of the buyers get their cases or get the victims, is through the internet. So, and it's all happening in a lot of other ways. And there's a few things that the legal system is doing. When we find these so-called massage parlors that are nothing more than a hotbed of human sex trafficking, in Texas now, we not only close them down, we take their land away from them. We can forfeiture the land. Criminal instrument there, Tommy. So you got to take the money away from them. You got to do everything. What we can do, to answer your question, we got to do what we can do. And it covers everything that we can do, we should do. What? One bite at a time. But letting people know, parents know, to protect their kids, I think is the first thing we've got to do as a society, is talking to parents. Did you have a question?
I have a friend who works on trafficking in Australia, and she goes at it from the angle of people who are in forced labor. And I don't know how much of a problem, not in the sex sense of labor, but making our cheap goods
It's the same thing. It is exactly the same thing. China is the culprit with that, and some of the other southeastern countries. That's forced labor. It's slavery, but it's labor slavery, not sex slavery.
Did much of that come through your court? Non-sex trafficking?
No. Primarily because those were dealt with on federal cases, federal courts. But that's just started to become prosecuted. That has been something that has been not really prosecuted, although it's been a crime for a long time. But people are put in these sweatshops, for lack of a better phrase. They can't leave. They're in slavery, and they make whatever they make, and then they sell it. And it's real cheap, and we buy it. And I will say, China is one of the culprits that used forced labor, slave labor, in the products that they make. Not all of them, but some of them. But we don't want to, that's a whole can of worms. We don't want to offend the Chinese, I guess. I don't know. I shouldn't have said that. What?
Talk a lot about what Texas is doing and how they're going from one state to another. Does that not become a federal crime, and does not the FBI or that type of law get involved in it?
The question was, if they go from state to state, is it a federal crime? Yes, it's a federal crime. It's a state crime, and it's a federal crime. The federal government has jurisdiction of those cases too. The law that I was talking about that changed, trafficking, the trafficker, the buyer, the victim, that's a federal law.
How do they work together, or do they?
They work together sometimes. Yeah, they do. Sometimes they do. On this issue, they do work together. And there is progress, I think, being made on the prosecution of these cases. But just a few years ago, it wasn't that many years ago, people were unaware that this was taking place in the United States. And we've come away from that now, and people understand what's going on. But okay, I've talked plenty. And is there another question? You want the microphone now? Okay, well, thanks. Reverend Jessica wants the microphone.
Thank you, Judge Poe. Yes, we are so thankful for you to travel all this way to talk to us, and just for your ability to illuminate us to this issue that is so important, not only in our culture here, but just the whole country and the whole world as well. And I believe they have a thank you.
Louisiana Holy.
Thank you so much again. Thank you. As we prepare to go from this space, let us go to God in prayer. Good and gracious God, we give you thanks for the words from your humble servant, Judge Poe, God. We just give you thanks that we are here to be able to learn more about this issue, about people, about your children, God, who are being oppressed, and the injustices that are being committed. We just ask, God, that you continue to open our hearts and our minds, as well as our eyes and our ears, so that we might be that compassionate Good Samaritan, so that we might stop and help our neighbor who is in the ditch. God, we just ask that you continue to inspire us and call us to be your hands and feet in the world, so that we might continue to bring the light of your love to all whom we encounter. We ask all of this in your Son's name. Amen. Thank you.